Hi, this is Dave from the Flowood High School Industrial Arts, and today we're talking about our project we're doing for the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade Industrial Arts project. And before we left school, you guys were working on designing a nightstand. And this is where we came. You were working on SketchUp, trying to work with that new program. And we came up with, we're going to build a nightstand. You have to excuse my little sketch I have on here on the whiteboard. But this is what we were going to make. We were going to make a 20-inch wide, 18-inch deep, and a 28-inch tall nightstand. And the material that we're going to use to make this so that it's an inexpensive nightstand to build. We're going to use for our sides and our bottom and possibly our top, we're going to use MDF sheet material. And for our frame, because it's going to be a painted nightstand, the wood frame that we're using, the face frame, is going to be made out of poplar. And poplar is a nice wood to use. Unlike pine, poplar won't warp and twist. It'll stay flat. It's a nice wood to use, especially for a painted material. So that's what we're going to use, and it's fairly inexpensive. So we came up, this is what we're going to make. We're going to have a drawer, an open bottom, and our top. And our top, we never got to what we were going to make for the top. I don't know. I might just make an MDF top with a rail around it, or we might glue some boards together. We'll see when we get that far, and have a wood top. But before we get started, we need to have a list of materials so we know what we're going to cut. That way we can go to the saw and we can just start cutting. And you guys had created a material list. You were working on creating a material list. And this is our list that we come up with. And anytime you write a list, you need to make sure you know what that part is for. So as you see, I have things written: sides, bottom, spreaders, styles, rails, rail. I have everything written out so that way when I go to cut, I know what I'm cutting. I'm not trying to figure out, okay, what was this piece for? And so we have two sides, our sides here, and I've got it at 17 1/4 by 27 1/4. Well, you'll know our side measures 18 inches. That's how deep we're going to be. That's our side, and our total height is 28 inches. So why are we at 17 1/4 and 27 1/4? We got to remember that we have, for a width, from the very front of the face frame to the very back of the cabinet is 18 inches. But we have a 3/4 inch face frame that we have to consider. So our side is going to butt into the face frame. So we got to take off that 3/4 of an inch. So the width of our side is 17 1/4. And the same thing goes for our vertical height of 28 inches. We're going to have a 3/4 inch top that's going to sit on there. And that may change if, depending on how you do the top, that may change if we put a drop edge around it. You know, you could make a wider rail up here, and which would possibly cause other dimensions to change. But we're going to plan for just a 3/4 inch top on this. So we're going to be 17 1/4 by 27 1/4. That's our sides. And then we have a bottom. Well, our bottom is 20 inches. Our overall width and depth is 20 by 18. Well, I have a bottom that's 17 by 19. And there's two things. How I came up with the 17 inches. The 17 is the depth. Well, again, we go back to, you've got 18 inches here. Why are we down to 17 now? Our sides were 17 1/4. Why is our bottom only 17? Another thing to consider, on our sides, we're going to put a 1/4 inch rabbet running from top to bottom. And that 1/4 inch rabbet is going to allow for our back, our 1/4 inch back panel that we're going to put on. It's going to allow for that. So if we're putting on a 1/4 inch panel, we want the back to go past the bottom, all the way past. We're not going to rabbet that at all. We're just going to make that narrower. So we're going to cut that piece at 17 inches. It might be a little bit less. We got to check before we cut it. We want to check to see the actual width of the material that we're going to use, because plywoods can vary in their thicknesses. So it might not be a true quarter. It could be a little bit less or a little bit more. And so we'll check that out and we'll make that determination and that size. And then the 19 is our width. So the 17 is the depth coming off the 18. The 19 is coming from our width of the cabinet. And the width of the cabinet is 20 inches. So we have a 3/4 inch side over here, a 3/4 inch side over here. And what we're doing is we're going to dado that bottom into the sides. So we have to subtract the two 17 inches off of the 20. So the 3/4 here, the 3/4 here, we got to subtract those two 3/4. So off of 20, you end up with 18.5 inches. So in between, on the inside, you'll have 18.5 inches. Well, we want to dado our bottom into our sides. So that way it has like a little ledge to sit on. We're going to put a stackable dado set up on the table saw, and we'll put a dado in our sides. And our dado, it's going to be a 1/4 inch deep dado. So our bottom, the size of our bottom, this 19 inches, is planning for a 1/4 inch deep dado. Like I said, our overall is 20. We got to subtract 3/4 from here, 3/4 from here. That's 1.5 inches. Take that off, you have 18.5 inches. Now we're going to go into the side 1/4 inch with the 1/4 inch deep dado. So 1/4 inch on one side, 1/4 inch on the other side. That's 1/2 inch. So we got to add 1/2 inch back to our 18.5. So we need our bottom cut at 19 inches. And then we have two spreaders. There's going to be a spreader that'll be up here on top and one in the back. And those spreaders are going to do the same thing. They'll be 3.5 inches wide and 19 inches deep. They'll be dadoed into the sides as well, and that's what's going to hold our box true, so that we have the same width here and the same width up here, and it's going to hold our box together before we put our face frame on. It'll also give support for our face frame, and it'll give support in the back for fastening our back on. So we're going to cut two spreaders, 3.5 inches by 19 inches. And so that's our box. So everything from here to here, that's our box. Now these other things, stiles and rails, that's our face frame. So your stiles, those are the vertical pieces. So anything vertical on a face frame on a cabinet, that's your stiles. Anything that goes horizontally, those are your rails. So we have two rails that are 1.5 inches by 17. That's the two top rails. So this one will be 1.5 inches wide by 17 inches long, and as well as this one is 1.5 inches wide by 17 inches long. And then our bottom rail, we're going to make that taller because this is going to sit directly on the floor. If we were going to make legs for the cabinet, we might make that one 1.5 inches as well. But since this cabinet is going to sit directly on the floor, we're going to put a 3-inch rail on the bottom by 17 inches long. And again, to create that length at 17 inches long, we have 1.5 inches here, 1.5 inches here. So you've got 3 inches that you're removing from the 20 inches, because the stiles go from all the way from the top all the way to the bottom, and the rails go in between the stiles. So you cut all 3 of those rails the same length, and you cut them all at the same time. And that's one of the things that's important when you're cutting your parts. It's better to set your saw up one time for each leg. That way you have less chance of error. So when we're cutting our rails, we'll cut them all at 17 inches right away. When we're ripping our boards, we're going to rip them, set the saw up one time, rip our pieces at that length, at that width, all at the same time. That way we're not making a 30-second mistake just based on human error. So we don't want to have to go back and try to cut something. You're more accurate if you can cut everything at one time. One thing about our rails though, we've got them at 17 inches. I probably won't cut them to length exactly until I have the cabinet itself, the box itself put together. Just to make sure we didn't make this overall, when we get our sides together, if we made a little bit of a dimension error, we end up with 20 and 1/32. Well, now if we went 20 and 1/32 and we put our face frame together, we're going to be a little bit narrow. And so we want to make sure, just because of human error, we want to make sure that we do end up that 17 inches works. So we can adjust those later to fit our box. If everything's done correctly, you can literally go off your material list. If you make all the cuts exactly according to what we have, and the dados correctly, and everything glues together correctly, you won't have to worry. These will come out. But just because of normal human error that we can make, we'll probably wait to cut these lengths until we have the box built. So for now, the only thing that we're going to cut, we're going to cut our two sides, we're going to cut our bottom, and we're going to cut our spreaders out of the MDF. We'll get the saw set up, get a sheet, and we'll start cutting. And when we're done, we're going to end up with a 20-inch wide, 18-inch deep, and a 28-inch tall nightstand. It's going to be open on the bottom, and we're going to have a drawer. And we'll get into making the drawer. Once we get it all put together, we'll get our drawer parts figured from then. And one of the things that'll determine your drawer size is going to be what height are we going to have here? Are we going to have 5 inches in between here? A 5-inch vertical? Are we going to have 6 inches? You know, what are you going to have? Are you only going to have 3 inches? So that'll determine what we do based on our drawer opening that we put in the face frame. And also what will determine is what type of drawer slides you're going to use. That'll determine your width. So your opening, your vertical opening will determine your height, and your drawer slides can make a difference on your width. So you need to know what you're going to be using. And so we'll go through all that when we get to it. But for now, we're going to just start cutting our two sides, our bottom and our spreaders. And once those are cut, then we'll set up the table saw with the dado blade. And we'll go through that, how to properly set up the dado blade. Okay, there's some things to consider in your shop if you have the capability of doing it, is being able to handle your sheet material. We have sheets of MDF here, and if you're trying to handle that by yourself, they're pretty heavy. We have it set up here in the shop. We built a cart, and the cart, we've got 4 casters on it so that we can roll it around pretty easily. We have the height of this cart, we set it up at the same height as our table saw. So that way we can come over here to our sheets, and by yourself you can literally grab a sheet and slide it onto the cart. And now you're going to be able to go over to our table saw and cut the sheet out by yourself. One of the things with MDF, normal plywood comes 48 inches wide by 96 inches long. MDF comes 49 inches wide by 97 inches long. They give you an inch of waste on it all the way around because they know that the edges are going to be banged up. So when you start to cut a sheet of MDF, you always have to, if we need a 17-inch rip, we're going to cut it 17 and a half. Then we're going to flip it end for end, and we're going to rip it again to get rid of that factory edge. And so we're going to do that. We're going to run through the table saw a little bit wider, but now that we have it on a cart, we have easy access. If you're able to do this in your shop or anywhere, makes it a lot nicer. Otherwise, to be able to handle these sheets, you're going to need at least one other person to help you run it across the table saw. Like I said, we have it set up here in our shop. So all you have to do, grab the sheet, slide it on the cart. Once it's on the cart, you can take the sheet and you can wheel it right up to the table saw, and you're ready to cut. Here's our table saw. We've got a Delta table saw with a 52-inch Biesmeyer fence. And the Biesmeyer fence is one of the best fences that they make, and this is a really nice saw and fence. It's pretty accurate. It stays pretty true. So we're really fortunate to have a nice setup here. Another thing that we have to make it easier so you can cut these sheets by yourself, we have a L-shaped table set up around the saw, and you know this. To the left we have a table and it wraps around the corner in the back. And this allows us so that we can cut the sheet all by ourselves. So now we have a cart that we can grab the sheet, put it on the cart, wheel the MDF sheet up to the table saw, and begin to cut it. On the table saw, like I said, is a Biesmeyer fence with a tape measure and a gauge. And on that gauge, we can set the dimension. We're going to cut our first sheet. We needed 17 1/4 inches. We're going to cut the first rip at 17 3/4, a 1/2 inch bigger, so that way we can turn the sheet around and measure and recut that factory edge off. When we're setting the fence up, this first time it's not going to be very fussy. We can just use the gauge on the fence. But when we go to cut our final 17 inches, we're going to want to look at the saw blades. If you look at those the teeth on the blades, those carbide tips, you can see that there is a tip that points to the right, and there is a tip that points to the left. So you have a tip here that's pointing this way, and a tip here that the point is pointing that way. Again, this one here, it's pointing to the left. This one here, it's pointing to the right. And when you're measuring, you want to measure to the tooth. You're cutting this piece on the right side of the blade. You want to measure to the tooth that is pointing to the right. So if we look there, we're right at 17 3/4. That's what you want to be looking for. And when you are setting up your fence, there is a lock on the fence. So you want to set the fence up, push this lock down tight. Then, once that's locked in place, then you want to measure from the Biesmeyer fence to the tooth, carbide tip, on your saw. If you measure with this being unlocked, that fence has some play in it. And when you go to clamp it down, it'll move maybe only a 32nd, but it might move a 16th, so it won't be accurate. So you need to make sure that your fence is locked before you check your dimension. This fence is fairly accurate. For some reason, the closer you get to 0 inches, the more accurate it is. The farther away you get, closer to 52 inches, the less accurate it is. I have no idea. That's something in the tape measure. So you always want to make sure you check. Set the fence, check it. Look at the gauge if it's at 17 3/4, and when you're reading the tape measure, it's showing that it's 17 1/32 stronger than 3/4. Then you know you can come back to the gauge, looking just at the gauge, and move that 1/32 back. And just keep repeating that until you have the proper dimension. Another thing to be aware of when you're cutting is making sure that your saw blade is set at the right height. Your saw blade should be set so that you can see in the saw, you can see kind of the valleys between, from the top of the teeth, there's a valley or a gullet, whatever you want to call it. You want to have your board, your blade set so that, I'll slide a board in place there, so that the bottom of those valleys, the bottom of those gullets is right at the top of your board. That's as high as you want to go. You don't want the blade sticking way above, and you don't want it to be sticking way too shallow. Sorry if the camera is moving, it's a little tough. So that's where you want to have the blade height set. That's just a good common standard. That's about 5/16 of an inch above the board. That's where you're cutting. If you have it too high, you can cause your board to bind a lot easier. If it's too shallow, your boards could be a little bit warped, not sitting quite tight to the bed all the way through, and you could get to spots in your board that you're not cutting far enough through, and then you're going to have to recut it again. So to make sure that you don't, this is just a good rule to use. The bottom of those valleys, bottom of those gullets, whatever you want to call them, set your saw blade up to that height. Okay, we have it set up at 17 3/4. We know we need two pieces that are 17 1/4. We need one piece that is 17 inches. So you also, before you start cutting a sheet, you need to start calculating, where am I going to get the least amount of waste? So I know I need one piece that's 17 inches by 19 for our bottom. Okay? I know I need two of them at 17 1/4. So I don't want to cut the 17-inch piece first, make a big long 8-foot rip when I only need a 17 by 19. So I know I need two of them that are 27 1/4. So you can just plan, okay, 30 inches. I need two of them of about 30 inches, 30, 60. Well, now I have a 96-inch piece. I've got 36 inches left. I need two 19-inch pieces, or one 19-inch piece. But I also need two spreaders that are 19 inches. So I'm probably going to be able to get that out of an 8-foot length. 19 and 19 is 38. 27 1/4 and 27 1/4 is 50. What is that? 54 1/2. So I'll be able to get those out of one rip. So I'll rip the 17 1/4. Our first edge, we're going to rip at 17 3/4. We'll spin the sheet around end for end. Rip it again at 17 1/4. Set the fence up, check it, and go from there. One of the things you need to make sure you have, like I said, with anytime you're using a saw, make sure you have safety glasses. Safety glasses is something that you may want to invest in a nicer pair. As you know, in the shop here, we've got safety glasses. They're not all very nice. They get fogged up pretty easy. But there are safety glasses that you can get that aren't staticky, so that the fines don't just automatically stick to your safety glasses. They have ones that won't start to sweat because of the humidity. So there are nicer pairs of safety glasses that you can buy. And if you're working on your own and at home, it's a good idea to invest in a nice pair of safety glasses. So we're going to start cutting this piece. We'll rip the first one. We'll spin it around, shut the saw off, rip it again to 17 1/4. Our on and off switch right here. Our fence is set, it's locked. Another thing, we got safety glasses. We have the vent open for the dust collector. As you'll see when we're ripping this, the MDF, it creates a lot of sawdust. We're going to have the dust collector turned on. Our piece is on our cart, and we'll be able to rip it by ourselves. One thing when ripping a board to remember, wherever your blade is, you have a push stick. You'll use your push stick when you get anything within 3 inches of the blade. So if it's within 3 inches, or basically between the fence and just past the red plate, if you're within that, your hand never comes anywhere within this red plate. So if you're ripping something 3 inches or smaller, you need to use the push stick. If it gets to be over 3 inches, you're probably better off not using the push stick because it'll become a hindrance. And as you're cutting, you're watching the fence along here. You're going to stand to the right. Typically, if you're right-handed, you're going to stand to the right side of this gullet that's here. You're going to stand to the right side of that. You're never going to stand directly in front of the blade, because if something does get caught, it's going to shoot out right there. So you're going to stand either to the right side of it or to the left side of it. And we don't want to stand directly in front of it. If you're ripping something smaller, you're going to be over here. You're going to have your hands always to the left side. To the left side of this gullet here. That way you know, if you're always staying to the left of that, you're watching the fence. You know where the blade is. The blade is to the left of this. So you're not even going to pay any attention to the blade. You don't need to know where the blade is anymore, because you know if you're anywhere in between this, you know that the blade's there. If you keep your hands to the right or to the left of each of those, you won't have to worry about the blade. Now you can watch the fence, making sure you're tight against the fence here and tight against the fence there as you're pushing the board through. And you want to make sure that you're tight on both sides. So we'll start cutting this piece. We'll turn the dust collector on, come back, turn the saw on, and we'll start cutting. Safety glasses on, saws on. Once the blade stops, we're going to change the fence to 17 1/4. We're going to check it. Looking at the tooth that points to the right, we're right on 17 1/4. Take this piece, spin it end for end, so that way we can cut this factory edge off. when you cut your piece, make sure you don't stop pushing until your piece gets all the way to the other side of this plate. So once your piece is to the other side, then you can stop pushing. Wait till your saw shuts off before you reach over, grab it, pull it around to spin it. So we've got our pieces cut. Another thing to remember, we're going to cross cut now. So we're going to spin the sheet lengthways, and we're going to cut this direction. And these gullets that are in the two different gullets, those are for your miter gauge. They're the miter gauge slots. And you can use a miter gauge to cut these when we're cross cutting. Anytime that your piece gets smaller from this distance to here, if it's smaller than this distance, you'll want to use a miter gauge. You'll set your miter gauge up. I don't even know if we have one here, because we have a chop saw that we would use. But you would use a miter gauge with a fence on it, and make sure that your miter gauge is square to your saw, and you would use your miter gauge. If you get a board that's too narrow, especially if it's the size of this opening between the blades or smaller, you're going to have a better chance for that to bind as it goes through there. If you have a piece that is small like this, it can, if you're not careful, it'll bind. So you want to use a miter gauge. And when you're using a miter gauge, you don't want to be using the miter gauge and the fence. You want to just use the miter gauge to push it through. So our board, they're 17¼ inches wide. They're wide enough we don't need to use that. But if we start getting smaller, then you're going to want to think about using either the chop saw or a miter gauge, so you don't bind it here. And when this catches, it's going to take the piece and fly back. So I hope this helps explain how to use the table saw. You got to make sure that you're safe. This blade, it'll take your finger off pretty quickly. Like I said, these valleys, these gullets that are in here, the miter gauge slots, keep your fingers to the right or to the left of that always. If you know where those are and you're keeping your hands on opposite direction of those, you're going to be safe. If you start getting your hands here, getting too close, you're going to have the potential of cutting your fingers. So as long as you're aware of that. So we'll get all of our pieces cut. And once they're cut, we're going to change our regular blade. We have an 80-tooth blade on here. We're going to change that, and we're going to put a stackable dado head blade on there.